Frozen wild Mustang begs rancher to enter his barn. He's shocked by what happens next. A lonely rancher steps out into a blizzard when a half-wild Mustang stumbles through the snow, pawing desperately at his barn door. But when the doors swing open, the horse isn't alone. Inside lies a shivering stranger, hidden beneath the saddle blanketan outcast, carrying a secret powerful enough to change the fate of an entire valley. Whispers spread through town soldiers closing in, ranchers thirsting for land, and a treaty hidden where no one dares look. The rancher thought he was just saving a life, but he may have invited a storm of danger, faith, and forbidden hope into his home. Now the church bell tolls, jail keys rattle, and hooves thunder across frozen ground. Will mercy and justice survive the weight of prejudice, and can a wild horse's loyalty be enough to protect the truth? What happens when compassion opens? The door to a battle no one saw coming. Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The wind howled like 1,000 hungry wolves, rattling the window panes of Randy Brandt's ranch house. He pulled his wool coat tighter, the collar turned up against the biting cold as he trudged through knee-deep snow toward the barn. The lantern in his hand cast wild shadows that danced across the white drifts. Just a quick check on the horses, he muttered to himself, his breath forming thick clouds in the freezing air. The storm had come on sudden and fierce, typical of Colorado winters in the late 1870s. A movement caught his eye near the fence line. Through the whirling snow, he made out the dark shape of a horse, its coat crusted with ice. The Mustang moved with an uneven gait, favoring its left foreleg as it approached the barn. Randy stood still, watching as the animal reached the barn door and began pawing at it desperately, as if pleading for shelter. Something about the horse's behavior seemed odd. Wild Mustangs usually avoided human structures, especially in storms, when they would seek natural windbreaks instead. This one acted different, almost tame, but with an urgency that made Randy's skin prickle with unease. "Easy there," he called softly, approaching with careful steps. The Mustang's ears flicked toward his voice, but it didn't bolt. Instead, it continued scratching at the barn door, its sides heaving with exhaustion. Randy reached for the heavy wooden latch. "Let's get you out of this weather, friend." The moment he swung the door wide, the horse stumbled inside, its hooves clattering on the planked floor. The other horses nickered nervously at the intruder, but Randy barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the way the Mustang's legs began to buckle. "Whoa." Now the words died in his throat as the horse collapsed onto the straw. Someone slid from beneath the saddle blanket, landing in a crumpled heap beside the fallen animal. Randy rushed forward, his heart pounding. It was a woman, dressed in a patchy clothing now soaked through with melted snow. Her face was the color of slate, her lips blue with cold. She didn't respond when he touched her shoulder. "Dear Lord," he breathed, gathering her slight form into his arms. She was ice cold and shaking violently, her breathing shallow and rapid. Without hesitation, he lifted her and hurried toward the house, struggling to keep his footing in the deep snow. "Mrs. Judkins," he shouted as he kicked the door open. "Mrs. Judkins, come quick." The housekeeper appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Eyes widened at the sight before her. "Land sakes! What in heaven's name found her in the barn?" Randy explained, laying the woman gently on the settee near the fireplace. "She's half frozen, need to get her warm." Mrs. Judkins's practical nature took over immediately. "Strip those wet things off her while I fetch blankets. And stoke up that fire. We need more heat in here." Randy worked quickly but carefully to remove the woman's drenched outer garments while Mrs. Judkins returned with an armload of quilts. Together, they wrapped her in layers of warm wool and cotton, tucking the edges snug around her trembling form, burning with fever. Mrs. Judkins announced, placing a weathered hand on the woman's forehead. "I'll put some broth on to heat. Poor creature looks like she hasn't eaten in days." As Mrs. Judkins bustled to the kitchen, Randy studied their unexpected guest's face. Despite the fever's flush, he could see she was young, probably in her early 20s. Her features were delicate but strong, marked by whatever hardship had driven her to ride through such a terrible storm. Here now, Mrs. Judkins had returned with a cup of steaming broth. "Help me prop her up a bit, Mr. Brandt. We need to get some warmth inside her." Randy slid an arm behind the woman's shoulders, lifting her carefully. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, dark and confused. Before closing again, Mrs. Judkins pressed the cup to her lips, coaxing her to swallow small sips of the hot liquid. "That's it, child," the housekeeper murmured. "Just a little more now." Outside, the storm raged. But inside the ranch house, a different kind of tension filled the air. Randy couldn't shake the feeling that this woman's arrival was more than mere chance. He'd seen enough in his years as a soldier and rancher to know that nothing happened without reason, especially not on a night like this. "She's Apache," Mrs. Judkins said quietly, voicing what Randy had already noted. "There'll be those who won't take kindly to that." Randy nodded, remembering the prejudices that ran deep in these parts. "Don't matter right now. She needs help, and that's what we'll give her." The woman stirred slightly, mumbling words in her native tongue. Her fingers clutched at the quilts, and Randy noticed how work-worn they were, telling of a life lived close to the land. "The Mustang that brought her," he said suddenly, "need to tend to it. Horse is exhausted and lame." "Go on then," Mrs. Judkins replied, settling into a chair beside their patient. "I'll watch over her. Seems the Lord saw fit to deliver her to our door tonight." Randy pulled his coat back on and headed out into the storm once more. In the barn, he found the Mustang had managed to stand, though it still favored its leg. The animal watched him with intelligent eyes as he approached. "You did well, bringing her here," he told the horse softly, running his hands over its legs to check for injury. The left foreleg was swollen, but not broken, just strained from the difficult journey as he worked to make the Mustang comfortable. Randy's mind turned to the woman in his house. Where had she come from? What had driven her to ride through such weather? The answers would have to wait until she was strong enough to tell her story. For now, he could only marvel at the strange ways of Providence. On this bitter winter night, when most folks would be hunkered down by their own fires, God had seen fit to send this woman to his door. Randy didn't know what troubles or dangers might have followed her here, but he knew his duty, both as a Christian and as a manhood. Seen too much suffering in his life already. Back in the house, he found Mrs. Judkins had somehow gotten their guest to swallow most of the broth. The woman's color looked a bit better, though she still shivered beneath the quilts. "She need watching through the night," Mrs. Judkins said. "Fever could go either way." Randy pulled up another chair. "I'll take first watch. You get some rest." "Mrs. Judkins, been a long day for you already." The housekeeper nodded, gathering her shawl around her shoulders. "Wake me in a few hours to spell you, and Mr. Brandt." She paused at the door to her room. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Perhaps he sent her here for a reason. Perhaps, Randy agreed softly, settling in for his vigil. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the ranch house, but inside, in the warm lamplight, a small miracle of mercy was unfolding. Whatever tomorrow might bring, for tonight at least, they could offer shelter from the storm. Morning light filtered through frost-covered window panes, casting pale squares on the ranch house floor. Karen's eyelids fluttered open, confusion clouding her features as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. The quilts wrapped around her were soft and warm, a stark contrast to the bitter cold she remembered from her desperate ride. Randy, who had been dozing in the chair nearby, noticed her stirring. He straightened slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Morning," he said softly. "You're safe here." Karen's dark eyes darted around the room, taking in the crackling fireplace, the worn furniture, and the snow piled high against the windows. Her hands clutched the quilts tighter. Mrs. Judkins appeared from the kitchen, carrying a steaming bowl. "Ah, you're awake. Good. Time for some more broth." She approached with measured steps, her stern face softening with concern. "I'm Mrs. Judkins. Dear, and this here's Mr. Brandt's ranch house. You gave us quite a fright last night." Randy stood, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm Randy Brandt. Found you and your horse in my barn during the storm." He gestured to the window. "Storm's still got us all trapped for now, but you're welcome to stay until you're strong enough to travel." Karen's voice was rough when she spoke, her English careful and measured. "Thank you. I am Karen Les." She accepted the bowl Mrs. Judkins offered, though her hands trembled slightly. "Careful now. It's hot," Mrs. Judkins cautioned, hovering nearby. "You need to build your strength back up. That fever's not quite done with you yet," as Karen sipped the broth. Randy moved to the window. Through the swirling snow, he could see the Mustang pacing near the barn, its tracks creating a distinct path in the fresh powder. Despite the food and shelter Randy had offered, the horse seemed restless, unwilling to settle in the barn. "Your horse," he said, turning back to Karen, "won't stay inside, keeps watching the house." A ghost of a smile touched Karen's lips. "Spirit horse. He finds me when I am lost." Her expression grew distant, troubled. "We ride far. Soldiers chase us. My people, they say we steal, but is not true." Mrs. Judkins clicked her tongue sympathetically, pressing a cool cloth to Karen's forehead. "You're still running quite warm, child. Best not to talk too much just yet." Throughout the day, Karen drifted between sleep and wakefulness. Randy kept himself busy with indoor chores, stealing glances at their unexpected guest whenever he passed through the main room. Each time he checked outside, the Mustang remained on its vigilant patrol, leaving only briefly to graze where Randy had scattered hay. By late afternoon, Karen's fever had dropped enough that she could sit up properly. Mrs. Judkins helped her wash her face and comb her long dark hair, treating her with the same matter-of-fact kindness she showed everyone. As dusk approached, Mrs. Judkins ladled out bowls of rich venison stew, the savory aroma filling the house. Randy brought Karen a bowl, setting it carefully on the small table beside her. "Much obliged," Karen murmured, the frontier phrase sounding careful on her tongue. Randy settled into his chair with his own bowl. "Would you mind if I say grace?" Karen shook her head, then bowed it respectfully as Randy spoke. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for shelter from the storm, and for bringing those in need to safe harbor. Amen." "Amen," Mrs. Judkins echoed, and Karen nodded solemnly. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the whistle of wind through the eaves and the occasional pop from the fireplace. The stew's warmth seemed to bring more color to Karen's cheeks, and she managed to finish most of her portion. Outside, darkness fell early, as it often did during winter storms. Randy added more logs to the fire, watching the flames leap up to consume them. The familiar motions felt different somehow, as though the very air in the house had changed. He settled back into his chair, aware of Karen's quiet presence on the settee, of Mrs. Judkins knitting in her rocker, of the Mustang's occasional whicker from outside. For the first time since his wife's passing, the house felt truly inhabited, not just lived in. The wind's moan held no loneliness tonight, only a reminder of the shelter these walls provided. Randy sat in thoughtful silence, turning over the strange twist of fate that had brought this wounded woman to his door. The emptiness that had been his constant companion these past years seemed to have retreated, at least for now, like snow before a warming sun. Mrs. Judkins's knitting needles clicked steadily, a counterpoint to the fire's crackle. Karen's eyes were growing heavy again, though she fought to keep them open. The storm outside seemed to cradle them all in its white embrace, creating a pocket of peace in the vast Colorado night. Over the next 2 days, the howling storm kept the ranch house isolated, but inside, a quiet routine developed. Randy devoted himself to helping Karen regain her strength, one small victory at a time. He would steady her arm as she lifted the soup spoon to her lips, his weathered hands gentle, but firm. Small sips, he'd remind her, watching as color gradually returned to her face. No need to rush. Mrs. Judkins prepared nourishing broths, adding more substance as Karen's appetite improved. Nothing heals quite like good bone broth, she'd say, stirring the pot with practiced motions. My own mother's recipe, rest her soul. By the second afternoon, Karen took her first steps away from the settee. Randy hovered nearby, ready to catch her if needed, but she managed to walk the length of the room on her own. Her determination showed in the set of her jaw and the careful placement of each foot. "You're doing just fine," Randy encouraged, noting how she gripped the back of a chair for support. "Steady now." When the blizzard finally broke on the third morning, they awoke to a transformed world. Sunlight sparkled off endless white drifts, the snow pristine except for the Mustang's tracks near the corral. The sharp scent of pine from the distant mountains. Karen stood at the window, drinking in the sight. "It is like the world is new," she said softly. The Mustang had refused to stay in the barn, preferring the open corral despite the cold. It paced the fence line, raising its head at any unfamiliar sound. When the Miller boys rode past on their way to check their father's cattle, the horse let out a warning neigh that echoed across the snow-covered yard. Later that morning, Karen made her way carefully to the corral. Randy watched from the porch as she approached the Mustang, speaking to it in low tones. Her movements were fluid and assured, despite her recent weakness. The horse's ears pricked forward, recognizing her voice. "Well, I'll be," Mrs. Judkins murmured, coming to stand beside Randy. "That girl's got the horse touch. Sure enough, look how that wild thing settles for her." Indeed, the Mustang had stopped its restless pacing, lowering its head to snuffle Karen's outstretched palm. She ran her hands along its neck with practiced ease, working out tangles from its mane. Even when she reached for its legs to check its hooves, the horse stood quietly, trusting her touch. "Reminds me of how my Jake used to gentle the wildest colts," Mrs. Judkins continued, a note of admiration in her voice. "Some folks just have that gift. They speak the language of horses, though they never say a word." Randy nodded, recognizing the skill in Karen's movements. He'd worked with horses all his life, but there was something special in the way she handled this fierce Mustang, as though they shared some deep understanding. The supplies were running low after the storm, so Randy saddled his bay gelding for a trip into town. The snow was deep, but the horse picked its way carefully along the packed trail. As he approached the mercantile, he noticed how conversations died away, replaced by meaningful looks and whispers. Inside the store, old Sam Morton took his time, filling Randy's order, clearing his throat several times before speaking. "Heard tell of a strange Mustang up at your place, Randy. One of them Indian ponies, they're saying." Randy kept his expression neutral as he counted out coins for the supplies. Mustangs showed up during the storm. Nothing strange about animals seeking shelter in weather like that. But the whispers followed him down the street. He could feel eyes watching from the saloon, the barber shop, the telegraph office. Word traveled fast in small towns, and folks were quick to draw conclusions. He was loading the last sack of flour into his saddlebags when Marshal Thomas Avery rode up, his badge catching the winter sunlight. The marshal's face was grave beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Shh, Randy," he said, reining his horse alongside. "Need a word with you." They moved away from the busy street into the quiet space behind the livery stable. The marshal's horse stamped in the snow, creating dark holes in the white blanket. "There's talk," Avery began, his voice low but carrying, "about you maybe harboring fugitives up at your place. Army's been through here, looking for some Apache folk. Said there was trouble down south." Randy met the marshal's eyes steadily. "I run an honest ranch, Thomas. You know that?" "I do know it," Avery agreed, but his expression remained serious. "That's why I'm giving you fair warning. There could be trouble if you're sheltering anyone you shouldn't be. The kind of trouble that burns barns and ruins good men's reputations." The threat, though subtle, was clear. Randy felt ice that had nothing to do with the weather settle in his stomach. "Much obliged for the warning, Marshal." "Cha," he said carefully. The ride home seemed longer than usual, his mind heavy with the marshal's words. The sun was setting by the time he reached the ranch, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Randy shared the news of his visit to town. Mrs. Judkins's face grew tight with concern, but Karen remained still, her eyes fixed on her plate. "The marshal came to warn me," Randy explained, choosing his words with care. "Says the Army's been through, looking for Apache folk. Says there might be trouble. Karen set down her fork, her movements deliberate. Without speaking, she rose and went to the corner where her few belongings were stored. From the folds of the Mustang saddle blanket, she withdrew something thin and rectangular, a piece of paper folded many times and sewn carefully into the lining. She returned to the table but did not hand over the paper. Instead, she held it close, her fingers tracing its edges. "I cannot tell you yet," she said softly, her eyes meeting Randy's.
But
This is why they chase. Please, do not ask more now." Randy looked at the paper, then at Karen's face, reading the fear and determination there. He remembered the marshal's warning, the whispers in town, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. But he also remembered finding her half frozen in his barn, the trust she'd shown in his care, the gentle way she worked with the wild Mustang. "Your secret's safe with me," he said simply. "You have my word." Mrs. Judkins nodded firmly, though her hands twisted her apron. "And mine as well, child. Though the Lord knows it may bring trouble to our door." Outside, the Mustang's whinny carried through the gathering dusk, as though the animal, too, understood the gravity of the moment. The sound hung in the air like a warning, or perhaps a promise. As the three of them sat in silence around the table, bound together now by more than mere circumstance, the next morning dawned clear and cold. Frost sparkled on the window panes as Karen approached Randy at breakfast, her eyes serious beneath her dark fringe of hair. "Will you come to barn with me?" she asked quietly. "There is something I must show you." Randy nodded, noting how Mrs. Judkins watched them with concerned eyes as they pulled on their coats and stepped out into the crisp morning air. Their boots crunched across the frozen ground toward the barn, where the Mustang nickered a greeting. Inside the barn's dim interior, warmed by the breath of horses and the sweet scent of hay, Karen retrieved the Mustang's saddle from its peg. Her fingers moved with careful precision as she worked at the hidden stitches in the leather lining, eventually revealing a small pouch sewn into the very fabric of the saddle. Randy stood close, watching as she withdrew a folded document, yellowed at the edges but carefully preserved. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, smoothing the creases with reverence. "This is why they chase," she said softly, holding out the paper. "This is truth they try to hide." Randy took the document, moving closer to the barn door where morning light streamed through the cracks. His eyes widened as he studied the official letterhead, the careful penmanship, the red wax seals and signatures at the bottom. It was a treaty, properly drawn and witnessed, granting Karen's people grazing rights in the fertile valley lands south of the territory. "These signatures," he said, tracing them with a weathered finger. "These are from the territorial governor himself and military officials. This is real." Karen nodded, her face both proud and pained. "My people, we have right to be there. But new ranchers come, say we steal horses, say we must go. They know about paper, want to destroy it, want our land." Randy read through the document again, his heart heavy with understanding. The treaty was clear. Karen's band had legal claim to those grazing lands. No wonder someone wanted this document destroyed. With it, her people could prove their rights in any territorial court. When they returned to the house, Mrs. Judkins took one look at their faces and set down her rolling pin. "Lord have mercy. What trouble have you brought to light now?" Randy explained about the treaty while Karen stood quietly by the window. Watching the Mustang pace in its corral, Mrs. Judkins listened, her lined face growing more troubled with each word. "You need to burn that paper," she said firmly when Randy finished. "Burn it and forget you ever saw it. Folks around here won't take kindly to Indians claiming grazing rights, legal or not. They'll bring nothing but trouble to our door. No," Randy said, surprising himself with the force of his response. "This paper means something. It's truth and justice, plain as day. We can't destroy that." Mrs. Judkins threw up her hands in exasperation, but Randy noticed she didn't argue further. Instead, she put Karen to work, helping with the morning biscuits, her way of showing acceptance despite her fears. As the day progressed, Karen joined Randy in his ranch chores. She moved among the animals with natural grace, her touch gentle but sure. In the calving barn, she helped him check on a newborn calf, her small hands competent as she felt for signs of fever. "You have way with creatures," Randy observed, watching. Her stroked the calf's head while its mother looked on calmly. A smile touched Karen's lips. "Animals know truth in your heart," she said simply. "They feel kindness or fear. Nothing in between." In the horse corrals, she showed even greater skill. A nervous colt that had been giving Randy trouble all week settled under her quiet presence. She worked with the young horse patiently, speaking to it in soft Apache words while demonstrating to Randy how she used gentle pressure and release to gain its trust. Randy found himself watching her more and more as the day wore on. The sun caught copper highlights in her dark hair, and her movements held a fluid grace that reminded him of flowing water. Something stirred in his chest, an awareness he hadn't felt since losing his wife 3 years ago. The feeling both troubled and intrigued him. As twilight settled over the ranch, Randy headed to the barn for evening checks. He paused at the door, hearing a soft sound from within. Karen's voice lifted in song, an Apache melody that seemed to rise and fall like wind through canyon walls. The Mustang stood quiet in its stall, head lowered, soothed by the haunting tune. Randy remained in the doorway, unseen, letting the strange, beautiful music wash over him. Though he couldn't understand the words, the melody spoke of longing, of wild places and starlit nights. It stirred something deep in his soul, something he'd thought long buried under grief and loneliness. Later that night, Randy sat alone by the fireplace, watching flames dance across the logs while Mrs. Judkins finished her evening tasks in the kitchen. The treaty paper lay hidden now in his strongbox, its presence weighing on his mind. But it was Karen's song that kept returning to his thoughts, along with the gentle way she'd handled the animals, the quiet strength in her movements. He remembered that stormy night when the Mustang had appeared at his barn, carrying its half-frozen burden. At the time, it had seemed like chance, or at best, an animal's instinct for shelter. Now, watching the firelight paint shadows on the wall, Randy wondered if Providence had guided that wild horse to his door for a greater purpose. The Mustang's warning neigh broke the evening quiet, followed by the sound of approaching hoofbeats on the frozen ground. Randy rose from his chair, his hand automatically reaching for the rifle above the fireplace. Whatever purpose had brought Karen to his ranch, he had a feeling events were about to unfold that would test them all. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at the Brandt Ranch. Each morning, Karen rose before dawn, joining Randy to feed the livestock. Her quiet presence in the barn brought a peace Randy hadn't known in years. She moved among the animals with natural grace, her soft words in Apache calming even the most. Fractious colts, Mrs. Judkins ruled her kitchen with familiar authority, wooden spoon waving as she directed Karen in the art of frontier cooking. Though the housekeeper's manner remained gruff, her eyes softened when Karen mastered the perfect biscuit or remembered to stir the stew just when needed. At least she's willing to learn, Mrs. Judkins remarked to Randy one afternoon, watching Karen knead bread dough with careful concentration. Unlike some who've passed through this kitchen, Randy spent his days mending tack and fixing fence lines, the leather smooth beneath his fingers as he worked. From his workshop door, he could see Karen in the corral, the wild Mustang following her like a faithful shadow. The sight stirred something in his chest, a warmth he'd nearly forgotten, but peace at the ranch couldn't stop the whispers in town. Each time Randy rode in for supplies, he felt the weight of suspicious stares. The mercantile owner's wife pulled her children closer when he passed. At the feed store, conversations died when he entered, only to resume in hushed tones behind his back. Harboring an Indian, he overheard one day the words sharp with judgment, and her with that devil horse watching the place like a guard dog. The gossip reached everywhere, from the saloon to the church steps, from the telegraph office to Reverend Morris's own door. The preacher listened to all sides but kept his own counsel, his weathered face thoughtful when Randy passed him on the street. When Sunday arrived, bright and clear, Randy made his decision. He hitched the wagon before dawn, determination set in his jaw. "We're going to church," he announced at breakfast. Mrs. Judkins nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Lord above, Randy Brandt, have you lost your mind?" "Lost your mind?" But Karen simply nodded, disappearing to change into her cleanest dress, one Mrs. Judkins had altered to fit her smaller frame. The Mustang whinnied from the corral as they loaded into the wagon, as if warning them to be careful. The small, white church stood proud against the morning sky, its bell calling the faithful to worship. Randy helped Karen down from the wagon, conscious of every eye upon them as they climbed the wooden steps. The usual greeting committee fell silent. Their customary welcome frozen on their lips. Inside, the whispers rose like rustling leaves as Randy led Karen to an empty pew. She held her head high, her bearing dignified despite the stares. A few families shifted away, leaving an empty circle around them. Mrs. Judkins, who had followed in her own buggy, settled beside them with a defiant sniff. Reverend Morris stood at the pulpit, his kind eyes taking in the scene before him. Without comment, he opened his Bible and began the service. When the first hymn was announced, "Amazing Grace," Karen surprised them all by joining in. Her voice rose clear and true, blending perfectly with the congregation. The whispers died away as her melody carried, pure as mountain spring water. Even those who had turned away found themselves drawn back, caught by the simple beauty of her faith. Randy watched faces change around them, surprise replacing suspicion, wonder softening hard lines. By the second verse, the entire congregation sang as one. Their voices joined in praise. The morning light streamed through plain glass windows, touching Karen's face like a blessing. After the service, Reverend Morris made his way through the crowd to greet them. He took Karen's hand in both of his smile genuine and warm. "Your presence brought grace to our worship today," he said softly. "Remember that you are welcome in God's house always." Later, as Randy helped Karen into the wagon, he overheard the preacher speaking to a group of concerned deacons. "Judge not, Reverend Morris quoted firmly, "Lest ye be judged." She sang his praise as purely as any soul here today. The sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold as they sat on the ranch house porch that evening. The day's warmth lingered in the wooden boards beneath them, and the Mustang grazed peacefully nearby. In the kitchen, Mrs. Judkins clattered pots with her usual vigor, but she had left them to their privacy. "Thank you," Karen said quietly, "for taking me to church today. It was a brave thing to do." Randy shook his head. "Wasn't brave, was right thing to do." Silence stretched between them, comfortable as an old quilt. A meadowlark called from the distant pasture, its evening song sweet and clear. "I had family once," Karen said suddenly, her voice soft with memory. "Mother, father, little sisters. Army came, said we must go to reservation. My uncle's band, we chose to stay free. To ride with wild horses, follow old ways." She touched the Mustang's flank as it drifted near. "Sometimes I miss them so much it hurts like winter wind." Randy's heart ached with understanding. "Lost my Sarah 3 years ago," he admitted, the words coming easier than he expected. "Child came too soon, too hard, couldn't save either of them." He looked down at his rough hands, remembering their helplessness that terrible night. "Felt like dying myself for a long while after." Karen reached out, her small hand covering his weathered one. The Mustang stepped closer, nudging her shoulder with its velvet nose. In that moment, they were bound together by something deeper than words, the shared weight of survival, the understanding of hearts that had known deep loss yet chosen to keep beating. The ranch house stood warm against the gathering dusk, lamplight glowing in its windows. No longer did it feel hollow, haunted by grief and silence. Now it held life again. Mrs. Judkins's cooking, Karen's soft Apache songs, the Mustang's watchful presence, and something new growing between them all. Yet even as peace settled around them like evening dew, Randy couldn't forget the danger. Somewhere beyond their quiet valley, soldiers still searched. Angry ranchers might remember that missing treaty might come looking for answers. The Mustang's warning neighs could turn real any day, but for now, they sat together in the fading light, their shadows stretching long across the porch boards, while the evening star rose bright and steady above the distant mountains. The late January thaw came as a blessing, softening winter's iron grip just enough for travel. Randy hitched up his wagon early one morning, the wheels crunching over patches of crusty snow. He needed supplies, nails for loose barn boards, and salt for preserving meat. The cold air bit his cheeks as he drove into town, but the sun held promise of a milder day ahead. Main Street was busier than usual, townsfolk taking advantage of the break-in weather. Randy tied his team outside the general store, nodding at familiar faces. Inside, he found the shelves well stocked, though prices had risen with the winter scarcity. As he counted out nails at the counter, voices drifted from the back room where several local ranchers gathered. "Marshall's got to do something about that Indian woman," one said, his tone hard as flint. "Bad enough having her kind around, but harboring a fugitive, that's asking for trouble." "Brant's always been stubborn," another added. "What? But even he can't ignore the law. Marshall just needs proper motivation to act." Randy's hand stilled over the nails, his jaw tightening. He forced himself to keep counting, straining to hear more. "Railroad men are getting antsy too." A third voice joined in. "Was talking to their agent yesterday. They need clear rights through that valley. Can't have any tribal claims muddying the waters." The store bell jingled as 2 railroad men entered, their suits marking them as different from the dusty ranchers. They headed straight for the back room, barely sparing Randy a glance. Their hushed conversation carried words like federal marshals and removal. Randy paid quickly and loaded his supplies, his heart heavy with worry. At the feed store next door, he overheard more whispers, plans to pressure the marshal, talk of forcing the issue. The whole town seemed to buzz with threat. He drove home, faster than usual, the wagon rattling over frozen ruts. The sun had climbed higher, but its warmth brought no comfort. As soon as he reached the ranch, he found Karen in the barn, brushing down the Mustang that had carried her to safety. "They're plotting against you in town," he said, without preamble. "Railroad men, ranchers, they're pushing the marshal to come. For you," Karen's hand stilled on the brush, but her voice remained steady. "I feared this would come." She turned to the Mustang, stroking its sleek neck. "Glory here. She saved my life through that blizzard. Carried me when soldiers chased us. Never faltered even in deepest snow." "Glory?" Randy asked, surprised by the name. Karen nodded. "She has warrior's heart, brave and true." She reached into her pocket, touching the hidden treaty paper. "This could protect my people if shown to right authorities. Proves our rights. 2 valley grazing lands. But must get it to Indian Agency office, past those who would destroy it." Randy watched as she offered Glory an apple, the horse's lips gentle against her palm. The bond between them was clear, 2 spirits joined by trust and survival. "Let me help you gentle her more," he offered. "Might need her strength again soon." That evening, they worked together in the barn by lantern light. Randy showed Karen how to mix extra oats into Glory's feed, speaking soft and low. The Mustang's wild eyes grew calmer, accepting their presence with growing ease. Even when Randy approached her blind side, Glory merely flicked an ear, trusting Karen's quiet reassurance. "Never seen a horse take to someone so natural," Randy marveled, watching Karen scratch Glory's forehead just where she liked it best. The lantern cast warm shadows across the barn walls, making the space feel intimate and safe, but safety proved an illusion. When they returned to the ranch house, Mrs. Judkins met them at the door, her usual stern expression creased with worry. "Saw a rider circling the property earlier," she reported in low tones, keeping to the tree line, watching the house. "Didn't recognize him, but he wasn't just passing through." The news cast a pall over their evening meal. Mrs. Judkins's biscuits, usually a comfort, sat heavy in Randy's stomach. Karen pushed food around her plate, her face drawn with tension. "Rather die than go back to reservation," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rather ride into mountain storms with Glory than live caged." Randy set down his fork, meeting her eyes across the table. "You won't face it alone," he promised quietly. "Whatever comes." Mrs. Judkins cleared her throat. "Well, they'll have to get through me first," she declared, lifting her chin. "I may be old, but I can still swing a frying pan with the best of them." The attempt at humor drew weak smiles, but couldn't fully lift the shadow over their meal. After the dishes were cleared, Randy watched through the window as Karen made one last check on Glory. The Mustang's coat gleamed silver in the moonlight, her guard stance alert to any approach. Later, in the stillness of night, Randy knelt beside his bed as he hadn't done since Sarah died. The floorboards were hard against his knees, but he barely noticed the discomfort. His whispered prayers rose urgent and uncertain in the darkness. "Lord, show me the way," he pleaded. "How do I protect her against such powerful enemies? How do I stand for what's right when it seems the whole world stands against us?" No immediate answer came, only the soft whisper of wind around the eaves and the distant sound of Glory moving in her stall. Randy remained kneeling, wrestling with his conscience and his fears. The treaty in Karen's possession could change everything or bring destruction down upon them all. Wealthy ranchers and railroad men held the marshal's ear, and their influence reached far beyond the town's borders. Yet, as he rose from his prayers, stiff and uncertain, one thing remained clear. He had promised Karen she wouldn't face this alone. And he meant to keep that promise, whatever the cost. Dawn painted the Colorado, sky in soft pinks and golds as Randy stepped out onto his front porch. The morning air held a hint of spring, though winter's chill still lingered. His boots crunched across patches of frost as he made his way to the barn for morning chores. Inside, Glory stamped restlessly in her stall, tossing her head and pawing at the straw. The Mustang's dark eyes followed Randy's movements, but her attention remained fixed on something beyond the barn walls. Her nostrils flared, testing the wind. She feels change coming. Karen's voice came from behind him. She stood in the barn doorway, her black hair catching the early light. Glory always knows. Randy nodded, understanding the horse's unease. Might do her good to run some of that energy off. Karen's eyes brightened. Without hesitation, she retrieved Glory's saddle blanket and well-worn leather saddle. Her movements were swift and sure as she tacked up the Mustang, checking each strap. With practiced care, Glory stood perfectly still under her touch, though her muscles quivered with anticipation, leading the horse into the yard. Karen swung into the saddle with fluid grace. Glory pranced sideways, eager to move, but Karen's seat remained centered and calm. Randy leaned against the fence, watching as horse and rider became one flowing shape against the morning sky. They started slow, warming up with careful circles in the yard. Then Karen gave Glory her head, and the Mustang's power unfurled. They raced across the winter-brown pasture, Karen's body moving in perfect rhythm with Glory's stride. Her riding showed years of experience, no wasteful motion, no fighting the horse's natural balance. They cleared a fallen log without breaking stride, Karen's delighted laugh carrying back on the wind. "Never seen riding like that," Randy murmured, admiring the pure freedom in their movement. Mrs. Judkins appeared beside him, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. "Girls got a gift," the housekeeper agreed, passing him the cup. "But such gifts draw attention. We need to be careful." Over the next few days, Karen's skill with horses proved invaluable as they worked together breaking colts. Randy had several young horses that needed gentling, and Karen's quiet methods brought remarkable results. She showed him how to read the subtle signals in a horse's ears and tail, how to build trust through patience rather than force. Their shared work brought moments of unexpected joy. When a gangly yearling finally accepted a halter without fuss, Karen's triumphant smile lit up her whole face. Randy found himself laughing more than he had in years, the weight of old grief lifting slightly in her presence. Meanwhile, Mrs. Judkins watched their growing friendship with mixed feelings. Her practical nature warned of danger, but she couldn't deny how Karen's presence had brought life back to the ranch. She found herself spending extra time with the young woman, teaching her English words from the family Bible. "The Lord is my shepherd," Karen repeated carefully one afternoon, tracing the words with her finger. "I shall not want," Mrs. Judkins nodded approvingly. "That's right. He watches over all his children, no matter where they come from." She had begun to see how faith could bridge the gap between their different worlds. The peaceful rhythm of their days shattered one evening as they sat down to supper. Mrs. Judkins had made her famous chicken and dumplings, and the kitchen was warm with good food and companionship. A sharp knock at the door froze them all mid-conversation. Randy opened it to find a young rider from town, his horse still breathing hard. "Message from Marshal Avery, sir," the boy said, holding out an official-looking envelope. Randy's stomach tightened as he read the formal summons. The marshal's flowing script demanded his presence in town the next day to answer charges of harboring fugitives and impeding lawful authority. Though politely worded, the threat was clear. "What does it say?" Karen asked quietly when Randy returned to the table. Her dark eyes searched his face, reading the tension there. "Marshal wants to see me tomorrow." Randy set the paper down beside his plate. Says I'm harboring fugitives. Mrs. Judkins's hand flew to her throat. Lord have mercy. I must go, Karen said immediately, rising from her chair. Cannot let you face trouble for helping me. No? Randy's voice was firm. You belong here, where truth is honored. That treaty proves your rights. Running now would only make things worse. But they will arrest you, Karen protested. Take. Your ranch may be too much risk. Some things are worth the risk. Randy met her eyes steadily. Truth needs defenders, or it dies in silence. Mrs. Judkins cleared her throat. Well, if we're facing trouble tomorrow, we'd best be prepared tonight. Her practical nature took over, pushing aside fear with action. They spent the evening in quiet preparation. Randy checked his tack and sharpened tools, not for violence, but for whatever journey might come. Mrs. Judkins packed food that would travel well, while Karen prepared Glory's gear with extra care. Their movements were purposeful but peaceful, guided by determination rather than desperation. As the night deepened, Karen knelt by the fireplace. Her voice rose soft but clear in a patchy prayer, the unfamiliar words carrying deep reverence. Randy bowed his head, joining his own silent prayers with hers. Though he couldn't understand the words, he felt their shared hope for justice and protection. Mrs. Judkins stood in the kitchen doorway, her worn Bible clutched to her chest. The sight of Karen praying touched something deep in her heart. Despite their differences, Faye spoke the same language of trust and submission to a higher power. The fire crackled low as Karen's prayer ended. Outside, Glory's soft nickering drifted from the barn, as if the Mustang too sensed the importance of this moment. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, but tonight they found strength in unity and quiet faith. Randy looked around at these two women who had become his unlikely and sparing family, the sharp-tongued housekeeper with her hidden heart of gold, and the brave young woman who had arrived like an answer to an unspoken prayer. Whatever the marshal might bring tomorrow, they would face it together. Karen rose from her prayers, her face serene despite the uncertainty ahead. The firelight caught the silver cross at her throat, a gift from Mrs. Judkins, and made it gleam like a star of hope in the gathering dark. The morning sun cast long shadows across the frost-covered ground as Randy saddled his horse. His movements were deliberate, each buckle and strap checked with extra care. Behind him, Karen stood in the doorway of the ranch house, her face etched with worry. "You sure you won't let me ride with you?" she asked softly. Randy shook his head. "Best I face the marshal alone first. Mrs. Judkins will keep you safe here." He mounted his horse, adjusting his hat against the morning glare. "Lock the doors after I leave." Mrs. Judkins appeared beside Karen, her weathered hand settling on the younger woman's shoulder. "We'll manage just fine. Go on now, Randy. Best not keep the law waiting." The ride into town felt longer than usual. Randy's mind churned with arguments and defenses, rehearsing words he hoped might sway the marshal. The main street was already busy when he arrived, townsfolk hurrying about, their morning business. Several people paused to stare as he tied his horse outside the marshal's office. Inside, the office smelled of wood smoke and coffee. Marshal Thomas Avery sat behind his desk, reading through papers. He looked up as Randy entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Take a seat, Brant," the marshal said, gesturing to a wooden chair. "Appreciate you coming in prompt-like." Randy settled into the chair, keeping his voice steady. "Reckon this is about my guest." "Reckon it is." Avery set down his papers, fixing Randy with a direct stare. "Word is you're harboring an Apache woman, one who might be connected to those raids up north." "She's no raider," Randy countered firmly. "She came to my place half-frozen in that blizzard." "What kind of Christian man turns away someone in need?" The Marshall's fingers drummed against his desk. "Mercy's all well and good, Brant, but we got laws to consider. Prominent folks in town are concerned. They're demanding action. Since when is helping someone a crime? It ain't that simple, and you know it." Avery leaned forward. "The town council wants to see her. Formal hearing, day after tomorrow. They'll decide what's to be done." Randy's jaw tightened. She's done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. Then she's got nothing to fear from a proper hearing. The marshal's tone held a note of warning. "Bring her in, Brant. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Rising from his chair, Randy fought to keep his voice level. "She come. But she'll be heard fairly, or there'll be trouble." "That sounds mighty close to a threat," Avery said quietly. "Just a promise of justice, Marshal. That's all." Randy turned to leave, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, as he stepped onto the boardwalk. A familiar voice stopped him cold. Well, if it ain't the Indian lover himself. Preston Hale stood there, his expensive coat and polished boots marking him as one of the valley's wealthiest ranchers. A slight smile played across his face, but his eyes were hard as flint. Hell, Randy acknowledged stiffly, moving to step. Past, the rancher shifted, blocking his path. "Heard you're keeping interesting company these days, Brant. Shame to see a good Christian man gone soft on savages." Randy's hands curled into fists, but he kept them at his sides. "That savage has more honor than some who wear fine clothes and speak in church, Mr. Hale. Savages don't belong in this." Valley Hale spat. "Council set things right. Mark my words, we'll see about that." Randy pushed past him, ignoring the rancher's cold laugh. The ride home seemed endless, the weight of the marshal's summons heavy on his shoulders. The sun was settling toward the western peaks when he finally rode into his yard. Karen and Mrs. Judkins were in the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Their faces turned to him expectantly as he entered. "Well?" Mrs. Judkins asked. Wiping her hands on her apron, Randy sank into a kitchen chair. "Council wants to see you, Karen, day after tomorrow." Karen's face paled, her hands gripping the back of a chair. "They will judge me without listening, without understanding." "No," Randy said firmly. "We'll make them listen. We'll have the treaty proof of your rights. Truth's on our side." Mrs. Judkins poured coffee into 3 cups. Her movements brisk, but da-da. Movements brisk, but her voice gentle. "Best we plan this careful. Then, can't go in unprepared." They gathered around the lamplit kitchen table, the evening deepening outside. Karen's fingers traced the wood grain as they talked, her voice trembling slightly as she described what she would tell the council. "Show them the treaty first," Mrs. Judkins advised. "Make them see the laws on your side." Randy nodded. "And? I'll speak for you if needed. Tell them how you've worked alongside us, helped with the horses. What if they not listen?" Karen's dark eyes reflected the lamplight. "What if they already decide?" "Then we'll face that too," Randy said quietly. Together. Later, after the women had gone to bed, Randy walked out to the barn. Glory's head appeared over her stall door, ears pricked forward at his approach. The Mustang's breath made soft clouds in the cool air as Randy stroked her nose. "You brought her to us for a reason," he murmured. "Now we've got to see it through." The horse stamped restlessly, as if sensing the tension in his voice. Randy could feel it too, not storm clouds in the sky, but the gathering force of men's prejudices and fears. It would break soon, one way or another. Looking up at the stars scattered across the night sky, Randy whispered a prayer. "Lord, give U.S. strength for what's coming. Show us the way through." Through the barn door, he could see Karen's window, where a candle still burned, its tiny flame a beacon in the darkness. Tomorrow, they would prepare. The day after, they would face the council. But tonight, that small light reminded him that hope, like a candle's flame, could push back the darkest shadows. The Mustang nickered softly, nudging his shoulder. Randy gave her one last pat before heading back to the house. Whatever came, they would meet it together, rancher, Apache woman, and hardy housekeeper, bound by something stronger than fear or prejudice. The truth in that treaty might cost them dearly, but some prices were worth paying for justice. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Randy sat across from Karen at the worn wooden table. Steam rose from cups of coffee while Mrs. Judkins kneaded bread dough nearby, her practiced hands working in steady rhythm. "Try again," Randy encouraged gently. "Tell me about the day you received the treaty." Karen's fingers traced the rim of her cup. "The officials, they come to our camp." She paused, searching for words. 2 moons passed. "They bring papers, say we have rights to graze here." "Good," Randy nodded. "Now tell me what happened after. Other ranchers, they not like this." Karen's brow furrowed in concentration. "Say, we steal horses, but this not true. My uncle's band, we breed our own horses. Trade fair." Mrs. Judkins turned from her bread making, flour dusting her apron. "Speak up a mite louder, child. Council members ain't known for keen hearing." Karen straightened her shoulders, voice growing stronger. "We have rights. Paper proves this. We want only peace, to live as treaty says." Randy smiled warmly. "Better, remember to look them in the eye when you speak. Shows you're telling truth." Their practice session continued through the morning, Karen gaining confidence with each retelling. The sound of hoofbeats outside drew their attention around noon. Randy moved to the window, tension visible in his shoulders until he recognized the rider. "It's Reverend Maurice," he announced, surprise evident in his voice. The preacher dismounted. Slowly, his black coat dusty from the ride. Randy met him at the door, uncertain of his purpose, but maintaining courtesy. "Reverend, wasn't expecting you today." "No, I expect not." Morris removed his hat, revealing graying hair. "May I come in?" Inside, Karen stood near the fireplace, her posture wary. Mrs. Judkins paused in her work, watching carefully. "I've been praying about tomorrow's hearing," Morris began, settling into a offered chair. "And about what I witnessed in church last Sunday." Randy braced himself for criticism, but the Reverend's next words took him by surprise. "The Lord commands us to welcome the stranger, to defend the oppressed." Morris turned to Karen. "Your presence in our church that day, I saw how you joined in worship, heard the sincerity in your voice during hymns." Karen's eyes widened slightly. As Morris continued, "I cannot stand silent while injustice is done. If the council will hear me, I'll speak on your behalf." Mrs. Judkins set down her rolling pin with a solid thump. "Oh, praise be. About time someone besides us stood up for what's right." Tears welled in Karen's eyes. She bowed her head slightly toward Morris. "Thank you, Reverend. Your words give courage." "And you'll have my voice too," Mrs. Judkins declared firmly. "Known this girl near 3 weeks now. Seen her gentle ways with animals, her willing hands at work. Any fool can see she's no threat." Randy felt something tight in his chest loosen. They weren't alone in this fight anymore. The afternoon passed with Morris helping Karen further refine her testimony. His knowledge of scripture and law proved valuable as they prepared their case. When he finally departed, the sun was lowering. Toward the western peaks. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Mrs. Judkins mused, watching the Reverend ride away. "Who'd have thought our preacher would show such spine?" That evening, they gathered around the kitchen table, sharing a simple supper of cornbread and beans. The mood was lighter than it had been in days. Even Karen managed small laughs at Mrs. Judkins' tales of past cooking disasters outside. Glory's snorts and stamping hooves occasionally punctuated their conversation. The Mustang paced the corral, pawing at the frost-hardened ground as if sharing their restlessness. "That horse knows something's coming," Mrs. Judkins observed, passing the cornbread. "Animals sense these things." "Glory brought me here through storm," Karen said softly. "Through danger, maybe tomorrow she'll bring luck also." Randy smiled. Luck, faith, and truth. Reckon that's a powerful combination. After supper, while Mrs. Judkins cleaned up inside, Randy and Karen stepped out onto the porch. The night air held. A sharp chill, their breath visible in small clouds. Above, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. They stood in comfortable silence until Karen spoke. "Randy," her voice was quiet but clear, "you ever think of different life, of starting new?" Randy leaned against the porch post, considering her question. The years of loneliness after his wife's death had stretched endless before him until recently. "Truth is," he answered slowly, "I never thought much beyond surviving each day, keeping the ranch going, living with memories." He turned to look at her. "Least, not until lately." Karen's eyes met his, holding something warm and questioning. "And now?" Now, Randy's voice grew soft. "Now I'm starting to see there might be other paths, different ways forward." A gentle hush settled between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. In the corral, Glory nickered softly, as if adding her own comment to their conversation. "Tomorrow will change things," Karen said finally. "For good or ill. Whatever comes," Randy assured her, "you won't face it alone." They stayed on the porch a while longer, watching the stars wheel overhead. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, offering a moment of peace before tomorrow's trial. Inside, Mrs. Judkins began singing an old hymn as she finished the dishes, her voice carrying faintly through the window. Glory's occasional snorts and the crunch of her hooves on frozen ground provided counterpoint to the quiet night. Randy found himself grateful for these moments, the simple comfort of shared silence, the promise of support from unexpected allies, the hope that justice might prevail. As the evening chill deepened, they finally turned toward the warmth of the house. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight they had this, a family forged by circumstance and strengthened by trust. Gathering courage for whatever lay ahead, dawn crept over the eastern mountains in shades of pewter, casting a somber light across the ranch yard. Randy hitched the horses to the wagon while Mrs. Judkins wrapped thick quilts around Karen's shoulders against the morning chill. Glory stamped impatiently behind the wagon, her lead rope secured but her head held high, nostrils flaring at the crisp air. "Remember what we practiced," Randy said softly as he helped Karen onto the wooden seat. "Speak your truth, plain and clear." Mrs. Judkins climbed up beside Karen, her usually sharp tongue gentled by concern. "The good Lord watches over his children, even in the valley of shadows." The wagon wheels creaked as they set out, following the rutted road toward town. Glory's hoofbeats marked steady time behind them. Karen sat straight-backed between Randy and Mrs. Judkins, her fingers working nervously at the edge of her shawl. The treaty paper lay carefully folded in Randy's coat pocket. Close to his heart, Main Street emerged from the morning mist, shop windows still dark. A few early risers paused in their tasks to stare as the wagon passed. Whispers followed like autumn leaves in their wake. Apache woman, Brant's lost his mind. Heard she's wanted, Randy guided the team toward the town hall, a weathered two-story building with white trim. Several horses already stood hitched outside expensive mounts belonging to the valley's wealthy ranchers. Preston Hale's black stallion pawed the ground, its silver-mounted bridle catching what little sunlight filtered through the clouds. Quite the gathering, Mrs. Judkins muttered, eyeing the crowd filing into the building. Half the county's turned out for this spectacle. Randy helped the women down from the wagon, then secured Glory to a hitching post where she could watch the proceedings through the hall's ground floor windows. The Mustang's ears pricked forward, alert to Karen's movements. Inside, wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious townsfolk. Ranchers occupied the front rows, their faces set in stern lines. Preston Hale sat prominent among them, his tailored coat and polished boots declaring his wealth. He sneered openly as Randy's group entered. Marshal Thomas Avery presided from a raised platform, his badge gleaming dully in the lamplight. His expression remained carefully neutral, though his fingers drummed an uneven rhythm on the wooden lectern. "This hearing will come to order," the marshal announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We're here to address allegations regarding an Apache woman harbored at the Brant Ranch, possibly in violation of territorial law." Randy guided Karen to the open space before the platform. Mrs. Judkins and Reverend Morris, who had slipped in moments before, sat close behind them. The floorboards creaked beneath Karen's feet as she stepped forward. "Your name?" Marshal Avery asked. "Karen Luz," she answered, her voice soft but steady. "Of the Jicarilla people." "Speak up, girl," Hale called out mockingly. "Can't hear your savage tongue." "Order," the marshal warned, though his reprimand lacked force. Karen lifted her chin, speaking louder as she'd practiced. "I come here with truth. My uncle's band holds rights to graze these valleys. We breed horses, trade fair with settlers. Never steal." "Lies," Hale surged to his feet. "Everyone knows Indians are thieves. They've been raiding farms up and down the territory." "Not all raids were by Indians," Randy interjected firmly. "Some were blamed false to drive them from their lands." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen continued, her English halting but determined. "My people wish peace. We follow treaty words, keep promises made." "What treaty?" the marshal asked, leaning forward. "This one?" Randy withdrew the folded paper from his coat, stepping forward to hand it up. "Found sewn in a saddle lining, protected through storm and pursuit. Official document, properly signed and sealed." The marshal unfolded the paper carefully, eyes widening slightly as he read. "This appears genuine. Guarantees grazing rights to the Jicarilla band in question, signed by territorial officials 2 months past." "Forged," Hale spat. "These savages are clever with deception." "The paper is real," Karen insisted. "Given in good faith. We keep our word, even when others break theirs." A heavy silence fell. The marshal studied the document with a deepening frown. Finally, Reverend Morris stood, his voice carrying clear authority. "I've witnessed this woman's character firsthand," he declared. "She joined our congregation in worship, showed nothing but respect and dignity. The Lord commands us to judge righteous judgment, not by appearance or prejudice." Mrs. Judkins rose next, her usual tart manner softened by conviction. "That girl saved my life not a week past. Old fool that I am. I slipped in the barn while feeding, would have been crushed by a spooked horse if she hadn't pulled me clear. Them's not the actions of someone meaning harm." More whispers rustled through the hall. Even some of the ranchers shifted uncomfortably. The marshal's frown deepened as he clearly wrestled with his decision. Before he could speak, the hall's double doors burst open. Boot heels struck the wooden floor as 4 soldiers marched in, led by a stern-faced lieutenant. Their blue uniforms bore the dust of hard riding. "Marshal Avery," the lieutenant announced crisply. "We have orders from Fort Garland regarding this Apache woman. She's wanted for questioning in connection with recent disturbances. We'll take her into custody immediately." Gasps and exclamations filled the room. Karen's face drained of color, though she remained standing straight. Randy stepped closer to her side, his hand finding hers. "On whose authority?" he demanded. "Colonel Harrison's," the lieutenant replied. "These orders are quite clear." He gestured to his men, who moved forward purposefully. Glory's shrill neigh pierced through the windows, as if sensing her rider's distress. Karen's fingers tightened on Randy's, her voice barely a whisper. "I cannot go to fort. They will not hear truth there." The soldiers advanced steadily across the creaking floorboards, their spurs jingling with each step. Mrs. Judkins clutched her shawl, while Reverend Morris gripped his Bible white-knuckled. The marshal stood frozen at his lectern, the treaty, paper forgotten, in his hands. Preston Hales satisfied. Smirk reflected in the morning gray windows as the soldiers reached for Karen's arms. The hearing room held its collective breath, caught between justice and power, mercy and force, as the scene balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. "Stand back," the lieutenant barked, his men forming a tight circle around Karen. "This woman is now in military custody." "You can't do this," Randy protested, reaching for Karen's arm. Soldier roughly shoved him aside, sending him stumbling against a bench. "She has rights. The treaty proves it." Marshal Avery remained at his lectern, face troubled but stance unmoved. "Got to follow orders, Randy. Army jurisdiction supersedes local authority." "Thomas, you know this ain't right," Randy pleaded, straightening himself. "Look at that treaty in your hands." The marshal carefully folded the paper, sliding it into his desk drawer. "My hands are tied, Brant. Fort Garland's orders stand." Mrs. Judkins pushed forward, her voice cracking. "At least let the girl gather her things. You can't drag her off like some criminal. She'll be provided what she needs at the fort." The lieutenant replied coldly. Two soldiers gripped Karen's arms, marching her toward the door despite her resistance. Through the windows, Ori's ears shot forward at the sight of her rider in distress. The Mustang's muscles bunched, powerful legs striking the frozen ground. As the soldiers emerged with Karen, Glory reared suddenly, front hooves slashing the air. Her iron-shod hooves nearly caught one soldier across the chest. "Control that beast," the lieutenant shouted as men scattered. Glory's rope strained, the hitching post creaking under the force of her fury. Her eyes rolled white, nostrils flaring. As she fought to reach Karen, "Glory, peace." Karen called out in Apache, though her voice shook. The Mustang's hooves crashed down, still dancing sideways against the rope. A soldier with a rifle but finally subdued the horse, though Glory continued to snort and paw the earth. Randy watched helplessly as they loaded Karen into the army wagon, her dark eyes meeting his in silent anguish before soldiers blocked his view. "This isn't over," Randy growled, but Preston Hale's satisfied chuckle cut through his words. "Looks mighty finish to me, Brant. Best forget that savage girl and mind your own business." Randy's fists clenched until his knuckles went white. Only Reverend Morris's restraining hand on his shoulder kept him from lunging at the smirking rancher. The wagon rattled away down Main Street, Glory forced to follow behind. Still fighting the lead rope with every step, the ride home passed in hollow silence. Mrs. Judkins dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, while Randy's jaw remained clenched, so tight it ached. The empty seat between them screamed Karen's absence. Back at the ranch, the house felt like a tomb. Every corner held echoes of Karen's presence. The shawl she'd left draped over a chair, the herbs she'd dried hanging from kitchen rafters, the Bible she and Mrs. Judkins had studied together. "What are we going to do?" Mrs. Judkins whispered, her usual sharp manner dissolved in grief. That poor girl, Randy couldn't answer. The walls seemed to press in around him, heavy with helplessness. As evening fell, he saddled his horse and rode out, needing space to think. The gelding's hooves crunched through patches of snow as they climbed into the hills. Near midnight, he found himself beside a frozen creek, its surface gleaming dully under starlight. A cold bit through his coat as he knelt in the snow, hands clasped in desperate prayer. "Lord, "Give me wisdom," he whispered hoarsely. "Show me the path between violence and surrender." His rifle, back home in its rack, called to him with seductive simplicity. One shot could change everything. But violence bred only more violence. He'd learned that bitter lesson in the war. Hours passed as he wrestled with his conscience. The eastern sky was just beginning to pale when he finally rose, bones stiff with cold but mind cleared by purpose. Charging the fort with guns blazing would only get Karen killed, and likely himself too. But there were other ways to fight injustice. The treaty was evidence that couldn't be ignored if enough eyes saw it. Enough voices demanded truth. The marshal might bow to military pressure, but he'd have a harder time burying justice if the whole territory knew about that treaty. The monthly territorial assembly was coming up in Denver. Representatives from every county would attend, along with newspapermen and government officials. Randy's horse nickered softly as he mounted up, turning toward home. His plan began taking shape with each hoofbeat. He would need help, Reverend. Morris's respected voice, Mrs. Judkins's fierce testimony. Copies of that treaty made before the marshal could lose. The sun broke over the mountains as Randy rode into his yard. Mrs. Judkins met him at the door. Concern etched on her face. "I was worried sick. Where have you been all night?" "Praying," Randy replied simply, hanging up his coat, and planning. He strode to his desk, pulling out paper and pen. "We're not letting this end here. Karen needs us to be smart, not just angry. Get some coffee brewing. We've got work to do." Mrs. Judkins studied his face, then nodded firmly. "About time. I'll fetch breakfast too. Can't fight injustice on an empty stomach." Randy dipped his pen in ink, beginning to draft letters to every influential contact he'd made in his years of ranching. The house still felt hollow without Karen's presence, but now that emptiness fueled his resolve rather than his despair. "Hold on, Karen," he murmured as he wrote. "We're coming for you with truth and law as our weapons." The morning light strengthened, casting long shadows across his desk as he worked. This fight was far from over. It had only just begun. Randy urged his horse through the crisp morning air toward the white-steepled church where Reverend Morris lived. The preacher answered his urgent knock, still adjusting his collar. "Brother Randy, what brings you so early?" "We need to gather the town tonight," Randy explained, stepping inside the warm parlor. "Every soul who believes in justice needs to hear the truth about that treaty." The Reverend's eyes sparked with understanding. The town hall, then, I help spread word. Together, they crafted a simple message. Public assembly. Tonight, matter of conscience. The Reverend took the west side of Main Street, while Randy covered the east, speaking to every shopkeeper and townsperson they met. Even Preston Hale's ranch hands listened carefully, several nodding when Randy mentioned justice. By midday, Mrs. Judkins made her way to the jail, carrying a covered basket. Bringing food for the prisoner, she told the guards firmly. "Pastor's orders can't let a soul go hungry, even in custody." The soldiers exchanged glances but let her pass. In the dim cell, Karen sat straight-backed on her cot. Mrs. Judkins pressed fresh bread and dried meat into her hands, whispering, "Keep faith, child. Randy's gathering folk who'll hear truth." Outside town, Glory paced her corral at the fort stables, head high and nostrils flaring. The army horsemaster reported she wouldn't touch hay or grain, only stared toward town with ears pricked forward, calling out in long, mournful neighs that echoed through the valley. As evening painted the sky purple, townspeople streamed toward. The hall lamplight spilled from frost-edged windows onto the trampled snow. Inside, every bench filled quickly. Standing folk crowded the back wall. Randy noticed ranch hands mixing with merchants, wives, beside working men, all drawn by the new promise of truth. Across the street, 2 soldiers stood guard at the jail's heavy door. Their rifles gleamed dully in the failing light. In a corner of the hall, Randy drew out his Bible and the precious treaty. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed the paper's creases, but his heart beat strong and steady. Finding a quiet moment, he bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, "let your justice flow like water tonight. Give me words to reach their hearts." The murmur of the crowd grew as more people pressed inside. Everything Karen's freedom, the peace of the valley, the triumph of truth over prejudice, balanced on what would happen in the next few hours. Randy stepped to the front of the packed hall, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Lamplight flickered across concerned faces as he opened his worn Bible. "Folks," he began, voice steady, "Proverbs tells us, open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the poor and needy." His words carried to every corner of the hushed room. Carefully, he unrolled the treaty paper, holding it high. "This document bears the stamps of our government and signatures of officials." Gasps rippled through the crowd as the official seals caught the light. "It guarantees grazing rights to Karen's people in this valley. That paper could be forged." Preston Hale shouted from the back. Reverend Morris rose swiftly. "Peace." His commanding tone silenced the hall. "We're here to witness truth, not shout. It down the Lord's word reminds us that justice must roll like waters." Randy's voice grew stronger. "Karen came to us seeking shelter from false accusations. She's shown nothing but dignity and grace. I demand her immediate release." Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Mrs. Thompson, the baker's wife, stood up. "She helped my Tommy when he fell last Sunday, cleaned his cuts, and spoke kind words. That ain't the action of someone we should lock away." More voices joined in support. "I've seen her gentle with horses," called out Jake, a ranch hand. "Works harder than most men I know." The marshal shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the tide of opinion turned. Finally, he stood. "Bring the prisoner," he ordered the soldiers. At the door. Minutes later, Karen entered, her face pale but chin held high. Glory's welcoming neigh rang out from where she was tethered outside, making several people smile. Mrs. Judkins couldn't hold back her tears as Karen walked to the front. The young woman turned to face the crowd, her English careful but clear. "I thank you all. My people want only peace and to honor the treaty's words." The tension in the room melted like spring snow. Even some of the ranchers who had opposed her nodded respectfully. For this night at least, truth had conquered fear, and mercy had won over prejudice. The morning sun crested over the mountains, casting diamond sparkles across the fresh snow. Inside the barn, horses stamped and whickered, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Randy and Karen stood shoulder to shoulder at the barn doors, their own breath mingling in the cold. "Ready?" Randy asked softly. Karen nodded, her eyes bright. Together, they swung the heavy doors wide. Glory, already alert and eager, trotted to the entrance. The Mustang paused, dark eyes taking in the pristine blanket of white covering the corral, then burst forward with explosive joy. Randy watched as Glory kicked up her heels, mane flowing like a banner in the wind. The horse that had once stumbled desperate through a blizzard now ran with the grace of complete freedom, circling the corral with proud steps from the ranch house. The cheerful clatter of pots and pans drifted out as Mrs. Judkins prepared breakfast. Her clear voice carried an old hymn across the yard, adding to the morning's peace. "Coffee's ready," she called through the kitchen window. Randy and Karen settled on the porch steps, warming their hands around steaming cups. The coffee's rich aroma mixed with the clean scent of snow. "What comes next?" Karen asked, her English growing stronger each day. "Teaching folks to trust," Randy replied. "Building bridges where there were walls, following where faith leads us." She nodded thoughtfully. Like Glory led me here. Randy set his coffee aside and knelt in the snow, bowing his head. Lord, he began, voice thick with emotion, thank you for second chances, for showing us that family comes in ways we never expect, for justice that prevails through your grace. Your grace. Karen knelt beside him, her quiet voice joining his in prayer, English and Apache words weaving together like threads in a blanket. Glory's soft knickers provided a gentle accompaniment to their thanksgiving. The morning light stretched across the barn's weathered boards, the same barn that had sheltered a desperate Mustang, and her precious burden on that stormy night. What had once stood as a lonely sentinel now radiated warmth and welcome. Its doors opened to a future bright with promise. Mrs. Judkins appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Breakfast is getting cold. You too, she called. But her stern tone couldn't hide her smile. The family, unexpected, unconventional, but undeniably real, gathered together to begin their new day. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. This story reminded you of what matters? Hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.